Hi, I'm Leslie Helpert, and the following is part of a series called The Mechanics of Self-Trust. If you don't have the entire series of nearly 20 conversations yet, you can get them all for free by simply going to dynamicvoicetraining.com/conversation series.html. That is dynamicvoicetraining.com/conversation series.html. Thanks so much. Enjoy. I'm so happy to get to have the opportunity to speak to someone that I greatly admire, Bruce Eckfeldt. And we're going to be riffing on self-trust and sort of how that shows up in the outer world of business and how we hone, refine, and work on those qualities or that quality in our own life and in ourselves. So before we jump into it, I'm just going to give a little introduction, and Bruce, you can definitely add on to this spontaneous bio of yours I'm inventing.
I'm excited.
Okay, great. So Bruce was trained as an architect. You practiced architecture and developed architectural programs. I think you were pretty much an instigator or integral at the beginning of like the AutoCAD world. Is that correct?
Yeah, we were. I did a lot of work in kind of the early computer-aided modeling, computer-aided design, CAD and CAM world. Just working with computer tools to design, to conceive of and design spaces, digitally and virtually, and then using them to present in various ways.
I love that. So already from early on, Bruce had a very integrative, like sort of interdisciplinary approach to systems thinking.
Yeah.
Say. And so Bruce is a top consultant. He helps double businesses revenue, and he's into like great scaling upward when he's brought into a team and working closely with entrepreneurial psychology or psychology of the people in the system. And one of the things I love about getting to speak with you as somebody who has, come from a completely different area of art and music and composition, I love the sort of crossover of creativity that I feel like we can kind of contemplatively meet each other in.
Yeah.
Bruce also, I found out, is like an exceptional creative himself. I have seen like your drawings and your riffs on Instagram, and also
Little stories that come up now and again.
yeah, and also an exceptional writer. And I also love how dedicated you are to like men's work and men's teamwork and what you find there. So I'm really interested in kind of talking to you about this theme of trust, and I have a few different areas I want to kind of hear from you about. So I'd say the first one is like during this time of like economic experience, I'll just say, that seems to be historically like almost unlike anything I know that definitely unlike anything we've seen in our time.
Yeah, our generation, absolutely.
What are you experiencing with teams you're working with? Like, is there a theme? Is there a sense of like what's going on cross-spectrally for you with the kind of work you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think at some level it varies quite a bit by team. Kind of depends on who they are and kind of what the team is made of. But I mean, look, we're dealing with a level of uncertainty that we certainly have never had to deal with before, and I think at some level we've never even seriously contemplated before. Meaning that I think a lot of teams, sit down and they do strategy, or they think about the future, and they ponder. It's like, oh, okay, well, we may have a serious recession or a correction in the market, or we could have another terrorist event or something like that. I mean, these are things that people considered, and maybe they didn't develop strategies around, but at least was kind of floating around as a possibility. I think the whole idea of a global pandemic was like didn't even make it on a this could happen list. In a crazy world this could happen. I don't think that was even on the list. So I mean, not only are we dealing with a level of a global event, but it's a global event that I don't think people had really even contemplated happening. So I think there's kind of two levels of the uncertainty here. And the other challenge that I find is that, well, a lot of leaders that I've worked with had dealt with 9/11 and Sandy and some of these other, particularly here in New York, some of the big kind of cataclysmic events that really disrupted life in general, but certainly business, but everyone's kind of day to day. Those were those were events that happened that we need to focus on recovery around. And I think a lot of the challenge that people are dealing with at this point is that there's no single event, right? There's no point in time when we can say, okay, this thing happened and now we need to recover from it and we're moving to correct or get ourselves back to normal. It's a very squishy, soft event that doesn't really have a defined beginning and end. In fact, we're seeing, or I think people are realizing, that we're going to have waves of this thing. We don't really know when the waves are going to come, how big they're going to be, what it's going to look like. Everyone's trying to get out of quarantine, but I think everyone in the back of their mind knows that we probably going to have to go back into quarantine at some point. And so that all of that, I think, creates a really novel situation in any leader as they kind of figure out how to provide some kind of path forward, because there isn't this kind of, all right, well, as a leader, I can sit down and say, all right, well, we need to recover from Sandy. Here's the 15 things we need to do. Here's the rough time frame. I can be very clear with my team. Here are our priorities. This is what we're going to do next. This is how long it's going to be. This is the plan. This is how we make the plan better. You just can't do that. You can't provide any kind of plan right now. And so leading in these kind of really not only uncertain but undefinable kind of situations it's tough, and it's something I think most leaders haven't had to deal with. And you can't use your normal strategies. You can't get up there and just convince people that everything's going to be okay. This is what we're going to do. We just have to push through. We have to try hard. You have to embrace this uncertainty, and you have to address it in how you lead.
Oh
I think that's a big change.
Awesome. So what do you think are the strongest tools of instinct you're seeing those who are moving through this with sanity in the workspace, leaders who are sort of sanely and fully kind of finding their way through it? What are like the natural instincts that are kind of coming up? What are the qualities that can help people kind of move through this time or be with this time in their place of work?
So, I mean, the one thing, certainly in the very beginning, that I was very focused on with all the people that I work with, all the CEOs and other leaders that I work with, is just getting really good about checking in with yourself. Where are you in this world right now? Where are you on kind of the continuum of, fear and panic to openness and absorbing new information, synthesizing information, figuring out options? Like, where are you on this continuum? Because quite honestly, if you're in fear state, the only thing you can really do, and the only thing you really should do in fear state, is address the fact that you're in fear state, and what do you need to do to start moving out of that state. Anything else that you try to do in that state is going to be highly compromised in terms of the quality of your thinking, and what any solution you try to come up with in that mode is going to be not a very productive solution. So knowing what state you're in, if you're in the fear state, what do I need to do to get out of the fear state? What do I need to move myself physically, psychologically into a better quality of thinking? So that's the one thing. And the second thing is then check in with all your people. It's really easy as a leader, particularly if you're kind of sliding or you're kind of halfway down that continuum, going into a situation, going into a meeting, going into a conversation, assuming that everyone's in that state. And that's where you can get a lot of not only poor communication and poor synchronizing around the things that need to be addressed, but you can actually create more friction and more problems for folks. So, literally sitting down, if you're going to the meeting with I mainly work with CEOs and their leadership teams, is sitting down with your senior leadership team and doing that check-in, and having that conversation at the beginning of those meetings to be able to say, all right, look, where are you, each one of my members at the table? And quite honestly, you kind of have to address the least common denominator, right? If someone's in fear state, you have to address that fear state. You have to at least recognize it, if not help them work through it to get them to the point where they can collaboratively, productively engage in the conversation. If you don't do that, you're going to throw the team off. And it might be that maybe they don't need to be, or maybe they can't be part of that conversation right now. Maybe you need to work with them separately before you can bring them back in. But those two things, like figuring out where are you on this continuum and where are your people on that continuum, is kind of like the groundwork you need to do before you can really go much farther than that.
Isn't that fascinating that our past has been informing our present experience for so long, but there's nothing like the removal of reality to really see how all of our stuff comes up, and we really can be on different wavelengths in this whole kind of process.
Yeah.
That's the first thing I started to feel, was that, I would have a day where I felt strong, and someone that I would be working with or engaging with, or a loved one, would be like having a different kind of an experience. And that the waves I was typically used to riding and the vernacular I used
Yeah.
to create that common theme, whether it was like astrology or a work project, there was no common ground in some capacity. And everybody, like, the first thing I felt like that helped create semblance for myself was just to allow, which is like not just, it's like I've been working on that one forever, and to accept that everybody was having a different perspective and a different experience. And I would, in one day, get a lot of variety of information about that experience, and regarding like the state of the world, like just
Yeah.
from so many different angles. And then I would have, a different sect, like my family or
Yep.
my parents, forward me something from their friends, and realize that, like, just the amount of like cultural, how we had created reality before. So in a way, wouldn't you say that, or would you say that there's some like strong skills we're actually getting right now, like some like soft, what is it, hard skills, soft skills, all kinds of skills during
Yeah.
this time, in realms of like feeling, right, feeling into connection versus like trying to,
Yeah.
I heard a great quote today, like seeking connection versus validation, and
Hmm.
or versus agenda. And that's what I'm noticing, like people relating to Cuomo or whatever. And I don't know, I just feel like his communication, not to get political because I'm super not political, is more like connected, or just around like, hey, here I am to be of service. Like I at least can listen to him because I'm like, okay, there's some sort of connection to the people here going on somehow.
Yeah. I mean, I think that any good communicator will figure out how to communicate in terms of which the communicate is going to absorb them and ultimately comprehend them in the way that you want, right? Like I'm going to misquote, I forget who said this, but the problem with communication is the illusion that it's occurred, right? So just because I say something doesn't mean you hear it, and just because I say A doesn't mean you hear A, right? You could hear all sorts of things. My job as a communicator to figure out, like, how do I get you to hear what I want you to hear, not just say things. And I think in this time, good communicators are realizing or appreciating that people's, not only the situation people are in, but how they view that situation is going to greatly impact how they absorb things. And so, I mean, to your example, I think Cuomo is clearly doing a good job of communicating in such a way that it's landing well with folks that are in these situations. And the same thing, like, with the leadership teams. I mean, you have to be able to uh, kind of work with someone at the level or in the situation they're in to be effective. You can't just assume or hope or push them into an area that they're not going to be in. And so, yeah, I mean, I think people are developing a lot of, look, this is creating an exceptional and exaggerated and exacerbated situation, which is making this more important, and people are having to really dig deep in terms of being able to do this well. But those that I think are leading well. I mean, I think they have a greater capacity to lead than those people that have not been able to do this or haven't developed that skill over time.
And would you say that those kind of leaders who are able to kind of find that connection are also, do you feel like they're taking some time to make sure that they're connecting to themselves and trusting themselves. Like, where does trust come into play with going through something like this, when we're looking at like the work of profession in our economy, workforce?
Yeah, I mean, I think trust. I mean, it can kind of come up in different sort of facets. I mean, I think one of the big things is uh, trust as it ends up uh, formulating or kind of structuring your underlying confidence. So I think there's an element of trusting yourself, not in that you're always going to be right, but knowing where your skills are, your experiences are, um, where your capabilities are, relying upon them in in a way that's going to help you build your confidence is going to be, I think it's just really important at this time, dealing with this stuff, because the a lot of what people are looking for, or that people kind of need, are other areas of certainty or of stability or of reliability to offset the vast uncertainty that they have in all these other parts of the world. So if you can really get clear with yourself on where you are, where your center is, where your strengths are, the things you do have control over, and focus on those, that's going to underpin your ability to show up in a strong, but also realistic way for your people, right? I think any leader that goes out right now and says, look, this, we'll just push through this, we don't need to, we'll overcome this. Even I think any kind of military battle kind of metaphor right now is highly problematic, because it's not, it's not the kind of singular identified enemy, adversary that I'm going to fight, and I'm going to win. One of the fascinating things about this situation is that we don't have that. I mean, this is a invisible, unidentified, uh, it's not even one thing, right? It's everywhere, floating around the air. It's so amorphous that we just can't use that kind of thinking. So, I mean, I think that for me, the trust kind of comes back to getting center with yourself, and trusting that, and using that to then show up with confidence, even in an area where there's a lot of uncertainty, is I think a lot of what good leaders are doing right now.
Wow. I'm like, okay, what else can I ask
Yeah.
for? You're giving me all these pieces that I'm loving. They're just so beautiful. And I'm listening to them, and with the way that I kind of interpret and see, and looking at these like multi levels of, of function that are
Yeah.
happening. It gives me a sense almost of like how your own creativity plays into your own like strategy and organization. And so when it comes to being able to, I love this piece around like, maybe in the past when reality feels like under our control, like I've got this, like, you know, the mail person comes at this time, and then this gun, and then I go down the street and this store's open and I pick up whatever it is, like whatever our world looks like. When all that shifts, like one of the biggest things I know that for myself as a person that has been scary is like forced change.
Mm-hmm.
Like when a rhythm gets thrown off, especially for people like entrepreneurs, for example. I mean, sometimes, do you ever feel, by the way, like side note, that the word entrepreneur is so overused? So I just want to say like self-made people who
Yeah.
which kind of constitutes like everybody. I kind of feel like everybody's self-made on some level. Like,
Yeah.
so anyway, when our reality shifts and we're forced into a kind of change, that's like one of the biggest, I think, fear pieces for humans, something we've resisted so much. Do you notice in that state that like leaders and companies are able to kind of look more transparently at where they haven't made changes in the past, and like kind of confronting or being more brave with looking at ways to change?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly see companies responding to the situation, leaders responding to the situation quite differently. I mean, you have some leaders which sort of see this as a set of changes that need to be kind of managed and sort of overcome and mitigated and countered. Um, and then I see groups of leaders, or I see a different kind of quality or different class of leaders who are fundamentally looking at this as saying, okay, where's the opportunity? You know, where is what is the new thing that we can do? And it may be required, you know, and maybe that, look, my current business model is shot, right? My business does not exist in this new world, or at least temporarily, maybe forever. Um, and you can easily see that as, okay, I've got to overcome this, or you see that as, all right, great, I get to reinvent myself and figure out which assets do I have, which capabilities do I have, which are now, you know, maybe they were valuable, they continue to be valuable in a different way. Maybe there's things that are now no longer valuable, and maybe there's things that weren't valuable before, but now they're valuable in this new world, right? And so they can kind of assess the situation. And I'm not saying it's like rose-colored glasses. They're thinking, oh, great, you know, global pandemic. You know, I've been waiting for this all my life, but they can look at that as saying, um, you know, every change in there as a set of opportunities. How do I find those opportunities, and how do I leverage that and use that to move forward? Um,
I just want to ask you a question.
yeah.
So when that's the question, what would be like the first offering that you would give a person, individual, organization when they're looking at, okay, everything I've been doing out here isn't functioning, but I've got these resources or whatever, like what would be the first thing? Do you go from like an inside out kind of level when you're helping to strategize or scale up or shift?
Well, certainly in this situation, it's very externally driven, meaning that my context has changed dramatically, and and typically what we're doing is kind of a multi-level or a multi-layered analysis of that. We usually go 2 or 3 levels down, which is kind of a, okay, well, we know these things have changed, right? We know that, you know, people can't, uh, people are social distancing, or they're isolating at home for a while, or restaurants aren't open, or, you know, we can't use certain things. Like, there's fairly immediate, fairly known things that are happening. And we want to take that down at least 2 or 3 levels, being able to say, okay, well, what does that cause? Like, if that happens, what are the consequences of that? And if those things happen, what's the consequence of that? Right. And we want to start doing this kind of strategic layering that tells us, how is this, what are the possibilities of how this are going to play out over the coming months and quarters? So we can start to see, okay, how do things shift? And I always start with customers, right? From a business point of view, it's basically, who are the people we serve, and what has changed for their world? Right? Do the problems that we've solved before still exist? Are they the most important problems? Does our solution still work in this new context? Right? I want to put myself kind of in this customer shoe to figure out, like, what has changed and how do I relate to these to folks again. Um, with this really kind of eye towards, how do I generate value? How do I create value for these folks? And it might be that, hey, I can no longer generate value for these customers anymore. So now I have to think about, who are new customers that I could approach, pivot. I mean, kind of the classic pivot concept. Pivot into a new market with new customers, ideally using my current services and products. It's tough to pivot both customers and products and services at the same time. But I want to start thinking about, based on the extrapolations I'm making about the situation and how that's going to play out and what it's going to do to my customer, what can I do to continue to deliver them value, is generally how we start that conversation. Then we kind of back that into, okay, well, what do I have capabilities around? What are the assets? What's the um, uh, intellectual property, physical assets, resources, skills, capabilities that I have, that I could apply or reconfigure in a new way to apply to meet those needs or to address those problems.
That's really fascinating because as I'm listening to you, I'm seeing this sort of like a little bit like, and we can shift away from COVID because it's my vision anyway that these talks. I mean, first, the reason I wanted to go into that is because I think some of these pieces are pieces that are just about like, well, when you strip away everything else,
Yeah.
all of the normalcy, like what is left with what we bring to the table. And I love the idea that rather than like meeting in this militant, we could say, or like heroic storyline, which is, been kind of thematic for like 5,000 years or something. We can kind of come to a place of like, well, I loved what you said about trust. Like, firstly, trust is one of those amorphous words that people use all the time. So I'd be interested to hear like your definition on some level, or kind of play around your thoughts on that a bit more. And I liked what you said about recognizing, well, what are my skill sets? It sounds like a much more humble way to lead, rather than, well, we're going to come in here and like smoke them out or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
To sort of be able to say, well, here's what I know I can offer, and I also know that the whole is like, on some level, way more significant than just me, and that, yeah, I'm a representation of the whole. And so when that comes, we'll just shift away a little bit, kind of remembering that how do we define self-trust
Yep.
question I asked you. But when it comes to just like, for example, person to person conversation, I'm somebody who thinks about creating from passion a lot more than being like, well, who are, what who are my customers? I'm like, well, what do I even feel? Because
Mm.
if I'm selling something that I'm not into, like, I'm definitely not going to sell that. I've tried. I suck at
Mm-hmm.
that. And even if I'm really into something, sometimes it's very hard to communicate what that thing is to people who might not relate to it in the same way that I do. So, and I see that a lot with people, particularly, I want to say like a lot of the people I'm working with in realms of voice, that they know they have a feeling and they have a passion, and they're just not sure how to express it or how to trust it when they're communicating with other people. So what is it that helps us um, orient from a place of self-trust, and how do you like understand what trust is on just a person to person level or person to self level?
It's interesting. I think about trust a lot in terms of kind of confidence, and I think that a lot of the the, the trust that I end up sort of dealing with, both kind of personally and the professional work I do, is is really about helping people understand what forms the basis of confidence around the things that they're doing or feeling and thinking, and through that is where I kind of build that trust. Like, I will trust somebody who is confident about what they're doing, why they're doing it, how they're going to do it, because I see them, I, I see a high probability on their ability to follow through, right? The high confidence level gives me trust, or gives me, high degree of certainty that that will likely happen one way or another. And I think that happens internally as well. I think your own kind of self trust is a function of, well, how confident are you on the things that you've got going on,
Hmm.
and if you're not super confident on it, your self trust is going to be low. So a lot of what I end up doing as a coach is just working people on, how do we build up confidence around the things that they're doing. And a lot of it is kind of underlying beliefs and scripts and things like that, patterns that they've fallen into, that we, can kind of unwind or rewrite, or disrupt enough that they can start having new beliefs, new patterns, new stories that they're telling themselves that give them that higher level of confidence.
Pause there for a second,
Yeah.
because that's really insightful, I think, because we're talking about confidence and trust, and then whether it's in our personal lives or in building something, it almost feels like, I know for myself, and that I could get like a lot of inspiration about something. And
Mhm.
sometimes that inspiration, it feels like enough to sustain a whole entire vision. And then other times there's so many more pieces in just from bringing that inspiration to actualization. So if we're talking about work, for example,
Mhm.
for a company, like, to have that passion and then how to actualize it. And sometimes it really does seem that it's about these pieces along the way, and how to almost take that inspiration and be able to have the confidence to really assess all the parts. and to be able to gain trust in areas like people. And I wonder if you find this in work too. There are people who have like such strong vision or trait in one area, but maybe they don't know how to delegate properly. Or what do you see happen often when it comes to bringing like instinct, inspiration, and excitement and passion, and following that through with trust? What's the mark of strong leadership in that area?
So I have kind of learned over time, as much as there's great leadership models and there's things that great leaders do or highly effective leaders do, um, there is no one archetype around the perfect leader. Um, every highly effective leader that I've worked with has had their own kind of strategy. And it really is about taking the things that they know and do and are passionate about and are competent in and proficient in, and they leverage them to be an effective leader. But they all have lots of other weaknesses, lots of other things that are they're not sort of confident in, or they're not highly developed in, that other leaders may be in, and that's their strategy, right? So there's when I work with leaders, it's never about, okay, here's the model, or here's what a good leader is, and let's get you inside this box. It's more of, let's understand where your capabilities are and where are your natural sort of gifts, things that you are naturally proficient in, and figure out how to develop a leadership model for you that's going to use those effectively to do the work of leadership. Now, we still need to look at all the other ones. We can't have horribly deficient areas. We need to make sure that we're shoring things up and we've got some coping strategies and things. But there's a lot of workarounds. There's a lot of things, a lot of ways to do things that you can focus on the things that you're particularly good at and try to minimize your exposure to those areas that you're bad at. So I think that's the first thing, is just not feeling like you're trying to fit inside of a box, but rather you're leveraging your kind of skills and capabilities and natural kind of who you are, and turn that into your leadership model, your model for leadership. And I think that changes the game for a lot of people. Like, I think it just opens up the possibility that, oh, okay, I can be the leader that I need to be, not try to fit someone else's definition of leadership.
Isn't that so interesting too? Because in some areas we might have a lot of self-trust and others less. I know I can definitely say that's true for me and
Uh-huh.
everybody else I know in the world. So I love this kind of moment. It's like, it feels like an Oprah moment or something, where when you kind of realize like, wait, I can just lead the way that I am. I can just, and it seems like that sort of allowing ourselves to fill up with just that sense of self, just to say,
Mm-hmm.
here's what I am, here's how I'm showing up, these are the things I'm working on, these are the things that I'm bringing to the table. That kind of allows us to lead naturally, to lead.
Yeah.
And that's so interesting when we think of that in company, and how, like, what it looks like to naturally lead, and how might that change our relationship with our natural resources, for example. And what does natural leadership look like? And do you see a lot of companies like sort of shifting to try to support natural leadership and not kind of put their employees in this more box type of structure? How does that play out?
Um, I mean, look, I think the vast majority of companies are still uh, I'll call it a traditional leadership model for the most part. Um, I mean, you get some exceptional cases where that has really uh, manifested itself at the organizational entity level. Um, and it's showing up in some of the, like, the B Corps and some of the social entrepreneurs and people that are, thinking a little bit broader than just the sort of financial bottom line. But even there, I think that it's still at its infancy. I mean, I think, there's a lot more work we're doing in the corporate world to kind of model that, and to think about how do we change the playing field and change the kind of the rules of the game and the way we reward companies and leaders and businesses, that are able to do this. So I would say that, it's still very early. I mean, I don't think we're, I don't think, I don't think we're very far down that path yet. But I think the companies that are, starting to do it, um, are starting to see kind of new organizational patterns and new dynamics, new cultures that are in sort of impacting how they're showing up and the nature of the work that they're doing. It's hard. I think that we have a global financial system that structures a lot of how we do things and make decisions in the business world. So I think until some of that stuff really starts to change, you're always going to be operating inside that kind of context. But it's starting to happen. I mean, people are starting to think about this stuff, and there's kind of the two levels. I mean, there's just uh, being clear with yourself and how do you sort of tap into your own natural leadership style and kind of leadership presence. And then there's like, how do we as organizations really kind of think through, well, why are we in business and what does success look like and how do we measure that and what's the point? So there's kind of two levels to that conversation.
I love that because I feel like it breaks my heart. It really breaks my heart when someone asks what I do and I give them like usually a really amorphous answer. Lately, I've just been saying like, I work with mystery.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah.
Like, why not? I don't care.
Yeah.
And I was actually talking to one of my friends yesterday who's like a mega awesome, successful multi-business person. And I was like, do you ever just feel like you're done with having a title? Like, what do you tell people you even are at this point? He's like a farmer, entrepreneur, like restaurant. I mean, I can't even
Yeah.
begin to describe. He's like a philosopher. So, but I was going to say, it breaks my heart when, uh, someone expresses what they love in life and then they say, and I just work in a boring da 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 da, or I do this work and I don't care about it and it's really not exciting. I'm like, oh my God, if I that really hurts me because I know I think that it's very interesting, like why if business is constructed from this sort of like end goal of finance down to like, well, what can we do? How can we balance that out so we're passionate about what's repleting?
Mm.
Because if nothing else for me, I know more on an esoteric level of supporting people and their expression, this whole time has been about like wherever it is that we're not repleting ourselves and only depleting ourselves has been really up in people's face, like whether it's like
Yeah.
they're getting enough personal time in their life or having too much
Or too much.
time. Right. And so I just think about that and it's like I know that balance isn't it's not a static equation. Like it's not really maybe even a system. Maybe it's a mindset, maybe it's a level of
Yeah.
or gratitude, but I think that it's part of our economy, right? Wouldn't you say, or what do you think about the idea that our business and our economy is sort of like a sacred space? Like it's really a place for all of ourselves to show up. Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I might, and maybe I get too practical about it, but the business world is what it is, right? I mean, it's a system designed to create certain results, and there's certain rules and kind of structures around it to generate those results. And I guess I tend not to put a whole lot of sort of burden or oh well, we've got to change the system. I think the system is what it is. I think it's really kind of this question of, well, how do we frame it? How do we use it? What do we do we kind of ascribe to it to give it that power, and what else can we do around it? Like even your example of that person who has this beautiful passion, creative aspect of their lives, and then their professional side is boring and routine and
They,
unpassionate.
they call it that.
Well, yeah, so exactly. So I would say like it's kind of the I think a lot of that is, well, so a lot of that I would suspect is probably wrapped up into some kind of uh, their view or their concern about how they're going to get perceived about some of that stuff, and kind of classifying it in ways uh, to kind of characterize the thing that they're doing uh, socially. I mean, I know lots of really technical people who do seemingly insanely boring things for everyone else in the world, but to them it's incredibly passionate. But but because but because what they do is seen as boring, they kind of have to play the boring card to sort of fit in. So I think there's a little bit of, okay, well, what's the social context that is happening here that is using to kind of describe they're using to describe their situation. But the other thing is kind of their approach to it. I mean, I think that your passion, you know, and it's hard when we use all these terms of like happiness, passion, engagement, satisfaction. I mean, I think there is something about engaging in the work that you do with a mindset and an approach that can give you um, satisfaction, can give you a sense of purpose, even if the work itself is mundane. Right? I think there can be a separation between how you approach the work and the work itself. So, and that's a whole kind of discussion there. But I think there's an element of that, and I don't think we do a very good job as individuals, as a society, to kind of figure that out, or to talk about what that means, and how do you look at every opportunity, everything that you do as a chance to achieve mastery, even if it's simple little things. So I think there's some things there. I do think that there is we are kind of put in positions as we kind of go through our vocational development to have to make seemingly binary choices. Like I can either be happy or make money, or I can have a lot of impact in the world, or I can have a lot of financial power. And I think unfortunately there are a lot of situations that people get in where they feel like they have to choose. And yes, there's a choice to be made, but it's probably not as big of a choice as you need to make, or at least not a permanent choice that you need to make. That you can still integrate these things over time, or you can find opportunities to kind of integrate this stuff. I don't think we do enough of that.
Mm. Wow. Yeah. There are like a bunch of different uh, beautiful arms that just come out of that around happiness, and even that emotion, and how we grow trust in feeling like uh, uh, aligned or resonance
Yeah.
with whatever we're doing. Um, so my last question for you though is going to be, um, when it comes to choice, because you were just saying like these
Yeah.
binary perspectives, when it comes to making choice, or even like choosing to integrate two things that might seem binary and turning them into one singular amalgamation of your work and life or whatever, and but when it comes to like that moment where you're like, do I do it this way or that way, do I move my focus here or here, whether it's our personal life or our work life, or do I move my focus here, whatever it is.
Hmm.
um, what do you think is one of the strongest mechanical qualities, like a logistical thing that we do to be able to trust making a right choice?
Um, well, I think in terms of the choices, I think one thing, whether it's business or personal, I think most humans kind of get stuck in is the feeling that there's a limited number of choices, or they they create an initial set of choices and then feel like they need to choose between them right away. And I think one of the things I spend a lot of time with teams on is generating more choices. One of the best things you can do to get better outcomes is to have more things to choose from, and choices. They kind of come in waves, and typically the first wave of choices are not very good. Meaning the first thing you sit down and say, okay, well, what could we do? Or here are 5 different options. Those 5 options typically are not very good, and it takes a while to kind of develop, mull over, process, and a lot of it is you got to push it into your subconscious, and your subconscious does a lot more kind of connections and creating new things that you're not consciously aware of. So anytime you can engage your subconscious by giving your conscious mind something else to do. So I'll literally give people exercise. I'll have them work on a different exercise so that their thinking mind is now engaged in this other thing, so that their subconscious can start processing it. And then we'll come back to that problem and start generating more options. 9 times out of 10, your better options are going to come out of that second round. Right. So for me, the first thing, we do is we have to not force the process of developing options, right? If we can create more options, and the best options are going to come from not sort of not your thinking hard about it directly, but the indirect thinking through subconscious, those things are you're going to generate better options by doing that. So that's one. The other thing I talk a lot about is last responsible moment. So in getting really clear on when do you actually need to make this choice, and a lot of times we're putting pressure on ourselves to make choices before we actually need to make the choice, meaning that if we can actually, I call it strategic procrastination, right? If we can actually not make the choice right now and decide that, you know what, we really don't need to make this choice till next Tuesday, so let's not choose right now. Let's not force ourselves into choice. A lot of people force themselves into choice because they don't want to deal with the ambiguity, don't want to deal with the uncertainty. I just want to have the choice made. And there are times that's good, but vast majority of times for more important, complex problems, time actually helps you for the most part, right? It gives you more, it generates more options. You have more information. Things resolve differently. Things change in the world that may change what you want to do, right? So actually pushing out. Now you need to know what your last responsible moment is, meaning the point at which if you don't make a choice, the consequences of non-choice are going to impact you. But you can often put a time frame to that. You say, well, like the real thing we need to worry about is that they're going to take another job. You know, this candidate's going to take another job, or the customer is going to do this, or we're going to miss this opportunity, or you know, this is going to spoil at that point. We only have so much time to use it. Whatever, you know, whatever those things are. But put that data and say, I know I can make the choice by then, but you know, for the next 10 days, let's not make the choice.
I love that, Bruce. That's good. I'm gonna think about that one a lot. That's a very good one, just in general, to like be able to
Yeah,
sit a little bit more with patience and the unknown and like what that
the
gives us.
mystery.
Yeah, to sit with that mystery in
Yeah,
what we acquire. Um, I just want to thank you so much for,
thank you.
responding to my long-winded walkabout of questions and offering your genius
Pleasure as always.
conversation thread. And yeah, and people can find, where do you like people to go if they want to find out more about your services? Your
Yeah.
amazing.
So my website, eckfeldt.com, ECKFELDT.com, kind of has my home base. It's got my podcasts. It's got writing I do for Inc. and things like that. You can get it all there. So go check that out.
Amazing. Awesome. I was just there this morning. Thank
Thank you.
you again.
My pleasure as always.